Good morning. Thanks for joining me. Let's talk about life in the 50s in the Thormsby. Living in 24 Bargate Street in the Thormsby, just off the marketplace, was definitely interesting life. Coal fires, no hot water, no electricity, two up and two down property, neighbours either side, lots of aunts and uncles popping by for market day. That used to drive my dad mad. He was a hard-working painter and decorator, ex-RAF man. He wasn't keen on the ever-open door policy of Bargate Street. So if he was ever around, the door would be firmly shut and he would be sat in his chair, smoking a woodbine or capstan full strength, having a drink of coffee and reading a paper. My mother would invariably be baking, mostly bread, lots of wholesome good food on the go. How on earth she and others like her, how on earth they provided such wholesome food in such conditions, it beggars belief. I had a sibling, a 3 years older than me, brother called Barry. Quite a studious lad. He had quite a bit of illness during his school days, so he didn't achieve academically what he should have. Now he was the favourite of the family, the apple of my dad's eye, and Barry and my dad would sit and talk about history and learn about motorbikes, and I would be deep into comics. Yeah. Boys World, The Eagle, Beano, Dandy, Topper, lots and lots of comics. I became a mechie fitter in later years and travelled all over the world on and offshore. So it didn't do me any harm, but I had to learn everything myself. In our house, the hierarchy was my dad taught my brother, who was supposed to teach me. Can you imagine that? My brother, only 3 years difference, having to teach a young sprog of a brother things that he knew. Yes, I envy their bond. I can picture it now. But, c'est la vie. Getting back to the comics, which were invariably under the cushions of the chairs in the settee. I loved The Boy's World. It had a bright cover where it explained how some boy somewhere in the world had got out of a scrape. And you could imagine being that similar person and learning those skills to get out of similar scrapes. Not that I ever waded into quicksand or had to escape a jungle, but you get the picture. It was imaginative and got you thinking. There was always competitions in the comics. I used to enter competitions. I once won 2 tickets to see a show in London. Of course, we couldn't get there. 250 miles might as well have been the end of the world in those days. If we travelled to York, which was 50 miles away, by motorcycle, it was a journey and a half, and one of the bikes would possibly break down on the way. So 250 miles, it was out the question. I think we wrote to the competition people and they sent us book tokens instead of attending these shows. So yes, I was always entering competitions and doing puzzles. It was brilliant. My brother and I would share comics, but not quite on the same plane. As I say, he was studious. One day at Smeaton Street, of which we both attended, I was in one of the middle year classes and he was in one of the top year classes. One day our teacher was off and our class was spread across the other classes, and I ended up in my brother's class. And I remember winning a bottle of milk answering a question. So there I was, 3 years above my pay grade, answering questions in my brother's class and winning prizes. Getting back to Smeaton Street. Great, absolutely great time. The teachers were inspirational. The outdoor gym equipment was a bit challenging. I can remember high rings, or they were high to us as small children, and I can remember how dangerous they were and falling off them. I could never climb a rope. I didn't have the upper body strength or coordination, so I didn't really take to sports. I was more into yo-yos and tricks. Yo-yos, Luma 99s, over the falls, walking the dog. Do you remember? I do. Of course, you dash home from school just so you can go back out again to play. You might grab something to eat, but then you were out until the lights came on the street lamps. And this was most days of the week, except for Sunday. Sunday we'd gather round the radio and listen to the Clitheroe Kid and other programmes on the radio. Sometimes trusted friends would be allowed in and we'd all sit and listen. I can remember big band music. I can remember comedians. So it was a unwritten bonding. My mum and dad on a Sunday would attend church. And I don't know how religious they were. We didn't go with them. We would stay at home with some babysitter. So my parents would go to a church and then go to the pub. They weren't big drinkers, but they liked the social drink. My dad, and of course there was lots of pubs in the Thormsby. My dad frequented the Pennymans at the top of our street. I was never old enough to join him in the Pennymans. My brother did. My dad, he would have a go at playing the guitar, and written on his guitar, Eddie and the GGs. So I guess they used to have a ball in the pub. I eventually joined my dad and my brother in the Jovial Monk when I became 18 and went through the ritual of drinking and buying around and what to do, what not to do in a pub. But anyway, that's jumping ahead to the 70s or late 60s. I was born in 1950. What else do I remember about being a childhood of the 50s? I remember lots of friends, boys and girls, all mixed together. From pulling daddy long-legged spiders out of drain pipes to scare people, to playing alleys in the gutter. We had a few bikes, but not a lot. Bikes in Bargate Street would do the rounds, go from house to house. As people grew out of the bike, it would be passed on. I remember we stuck many a Christmas present in our house that was waiting to go to a child somewhere else in the street on Christmas Day. Typical Christmas presents for myself would be a football, a KC that was, a stagecoach, horses and people, and handmade gifts by my father of castles with drawbridges and keeps. He must have spent many hours building. I had some amazing castles and structures built by my dad. He was an avid radio builder. And bear in mind there was no electricity in the house. How he managed, who knows. For his electricity, he used to use these large tubular batteries called accumulators. And I guess she charged them up somehow and then tapped into them to use them for power. My father would build radios, and we all had one, all over the house, in the bedrooms, everywhere. You'd be tuning in late at night to try and pick up a signal. Amazing times. I can't remember what battery source he would use, but I can remember terms like cat's whisker and radio hams. Underneath the stairs in the kitchen was a very large cupboard, and it was full a tea chest of radio parts and a stack as high as me of motorcycle books. And I used to get them out a handful at a time and read them. And as a child, obviously I couldn't answer any of the questions, but that was just at first. And then, lo and behold, after reading through more and more of these motorcycle mags, I could answer some of the questions. How's that, you ask? Well, every 2 years, in the motorcycle and motorcycle news, the same questions cropped up, and of course the same answers sufficed. So, if I'd read 2 years of magazines, I maybe remember that question. Yes, I read through every one of his motorcycle mags, and that gave me appreciation for building and longing to own and tune motorcycles. Our backyard was never empty of a motorbike. There was a carpet underneath the motorcycle, and it was that full of oil it looked like part of the floor. That was British motorcycles for you, dripping oil. And my dad, he would tell us about gremlins, and he was half serious, so you listened, and he would tell us, my brother and I, about gremlins in the RAF and gremlins in motorcycling, how they would stop the bike starting or make a part difficult to operate. So we grew up with a healthy respect for gremlins and mechanical parts. A thought's just popped into my head, so I'll have to share it before it pops out again. I always wanted a large motorcycle, and we had quite a few over the years in our backyard. And my dad brought in a Triumph Thunderbird 6T, 650cc, twin cylinder, quite a fast bike. My brother fancied it, but of course it was too large for the likes of my brother. So my dad said to him, if you can start it, you can have it. Of course he couldn't start it, but I did. No, I didn't get to own the Triumph Thunderbird, but I did start it. Woohoo! Back to bikes in a later episode, I think. Getting back into the house in Bargate Street. It was cold, but that just made you appreciate the fire. It was a coal fire. The coalman would deliver, and we would have coal fires every day. As we lay in bed early on in the morning, we'd hear my mother making the fire, laying it, wood, paper, coal, and then covering the whole of the front of the fireplace with a double sheet of newspaper, and this made the fire raw, and I guess it started it up. Now, my brother and I would lay snuggled up in bed, separate beds, single beds, in the front bedroom, right above the living room, so we could hear everything. We'd get the call to come down for breakfast and then school, and we'd go down to a roaring fire and our breakfast at the breakfast table. So we did have a regime. Now, sitting at the breakfast table, if I turned around and looked into the kitchen, I could maybe see what was going on in there. And some days I would see my dad getting a wash at the sink. Bear in mind that there was no running water. There was cold water, but no hot water. So everything was kettles. And we had a big white sink and a bowl, and my dad would roll his sleeves up and take his collar off his shirt and have a wash that way. These are the memories that implanted ideas in your head. So I guess you didn't strip down, take your shirt off completely in such conditions without considering it first. Those were the times of weekly bathing in a tin tub in front of the fire. Memories of the open fire. Sorry if I'm jumping backwards and forwards, but this is how the memories are presenting themselves today. I can remember sitting on the potty at the fireside and tipping over and my hand going into the fire. It didn't scar me, so it can't have been any serious damage. But bear in mind, if I was on the potty training, I must have been a couple of years old, and that memory stayed with me all my life. Getting back to the bath. The bath hung in the yard, and it was brought in and filled up with countless kettles of water. I can't remember how it was emptied, but I can remember how it was filled and how my brother and I would have a bath each week. Funny how we moved from that type of bathing to the bathing of today, where we all have showers and baths and washing machines and regular change of clothing. We're told this, we're told that. Now those days, did we smell? Who knows? Maybe we all smelt the same. How was it not noticeable? Who knows? But it was acceptable. Now, in another period, later in my life, I can remember going to Smith Docks and putting on absolutely freezing cold overalls. But that's for another episode. Back to the childhood in the Thormsby. Very happy days. We had 2 or 3 cinemas at one time in the Thormsby. The Gem, the Pav, and then the newly built Majestic years later. The Pav, that was a notorious flea house. And one of my mother's sayings, make of it what you will, was you go in a blouse and come out with a woolly jumper. That was the Pav. Memories of it? Well, I can remember going to see my first X-rated film there, a horror. What were we told at the door as we bought our ticket? Take your badges off and sit down low at the front. Yeah, X-rated. So, in those days, films were rated U, universal I guess, A, who knows whether it's adult or, and then X, U, A and X, with different age ratings. When the Majestic was built, it had lots of new films, so of course we'd go, and you couldn't buy a ticket for an A film if you were underage. So what we used to do as children was ask adults who were going in to buy us a ticket. We wouldn't sit with them, but they would pay you in. They would buy you a ticket. The mind boggles how trusting we were, and how those adults treat us, that they would take us in, buy our ticket, and then we would just sit where we want for A films. Amazing times, really. Cowboy films, wow. As a young child, imagine a cinema full of children on a Saturday morning, all pretending and even dressed up as cowboys. There'd be a cowboy on the film, riding across the prairie, shooting his guns, and hundreds of children all emulating this. Happy times. On those notes, I think I'll draw this video to a close. Thanks for joining me. Join me again soon for more memories of being a child of the 50s in Northamptonshire. Our lovely doggy. Thanks for watching.